Okay. Thank you guys so much. Let's go to Second Timothy. Second Timothy chapter 3, please. I'm going to just start with kind of a summary of where we're headed, because I want to talk about being strong-willed for Christ, not strong-headed, not stubborn, but strong-willed. And the song we led out with, that we're all broken to a greater or lesser degree. And Paul writes about that in Romans chapter 7. We are all broken to a greater or lesser degree. What we want to be is what we want to be is less broken. Or at least as less broken as we can be. And James, thank you so much for your wonderful prayer that that opened this meeting, that we are broken, but God's making up the difference between us. And part of the ways he makes up that difference between us is obviating the truth. Like the song said, we know it. I mean, we might as well say how we're doing, what's going on, and find good Christians that will help us, support us, draw us out, strengthen us, and we in turn strengthen them. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 6. I just want to read this again. This is where the subject we're going into, but I'm not going to begin to expound it for a couple verses yet. But in 2 Timothy 3, 6, it says, "For among them," these are the ungodly people, "are those with false pretenses who slip into homes and capture the attention of weak-willed women who are weighed down with sin and led along with various passions, who are always learning but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth." So this context is pretty specific, but I want to focus on weak-willed women, and not just women, but being weak-willed in today's world, which we cannot afford to be as Christians. We'll get into why Paul writes specifically about women in a second. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. Because if we're not going to be weak-willed, it means we're going to be decisive. We're going to make decisions and then own those decisions. It's not we can't change a decision if it turns out to not work out or something like that. But good leaders make decisions, and they're not weak-willed. In Ephesians 6:10, it talks about, finally, be empowered in the Lord. And the verb is in the passive tense. And that becomes really important, because even though a great number of English translations translate the verse as be strong in the Lord, the emphasis of the verse is not that we are supposed to have the strength within ourselves to show up in life the way we really should show up. The verb is passive. Our job is to be humble, to be honest, to be in a position where the Lord can empower us. Now, the Lord's always willing to empower us. So there's a question, are we willing to be obedient, to be humble, to position ourselves where we can be empowered? And that's what's going on here. And that's what we want to do. We want to put ourselves in a position where we can be empowered. And sometimes that's just basically reflecting, having an understanding of what our potential decisions are, and then making a decision, standing on it, and moving forward and letting the Lord empower us in that situation. So Ephesians 6:10, be empowered in the Lord, that is, in the might of his strength. And that's what we want to do, put ourselves in a position that the Lord can empower us. Now let's go to John chapter 14. In John chapter 14, the whole Last Supper discourse with Jesus, which started in chapter 13, goes all the way through his prayer in John chapter 17. It's basically something like 20% of the book of the entire Gospel of John is the Last Supper. I mean, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 5 chapters of the Gospel of John is the Last Supper. That should tell us something right away, that what Christ is saying here is super important. And he talks about him leaving and him pouring out the Holy Spirit, which is the helper, the one that's going to help, and that should point us in the right direction. And then of course, he's already told them that what we call the Olivet Discourse, where the disciples came to him and said, what are going to be the signs of your coming? He goes, well, yeah, that's not going to be very pretty. Let's talk about the signs of my coming. Well, there's going to be wars. There's going to be famines. There's going to be earthquakes. The sea is going to become tumultuous and people are going to be scared. And by the way, you're going to be arrested, tortured, killed. Yeah, it's not going to be too pretty. So he's already laid this out for them. Now he's telling him he's going away. And how do you, I mean, you know, I can put myself in that position going, and remember the disciples by this time, maybe in their late teens, possibly in their early 20s, but very likely he's looking at guys that are 18, 19, 20 years old, and they've been under his tutelage and watched him do miracles. And now he says, well, guys, I'm leaving. And by the way, things are going to get tough and you're going to get arrested and tortured and killed. It's like, and you're leaving, and you can just imagine, it's just kind of a sense of panic that would overcome them. And then in verse 27, he says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. And then he clarifies this. And he says, I don't give it to you as the world gives. How does the world give peace? How do you have financial peace in the world? You have more money than you can spend. How do you have health peace in the world? You have a super wonderful insurance program and you're perfectly healthy at the time. How do you have peace with your neighborhood or peace with, you don't have any enemy neighbors? The peace of the world is to make everything around you okay, including you. And yet what we just learned in the song, what we know from Romans 7, we're not okay. In fact, we know it from life. We're not okay. We're broken. And furthermore, it sure would be nice if Jesus was here to take the pressure off. Instead, what he does is he says, I give you Holy Spirit and it'll help you take the pressure off yourself. That's sort of basically it. Make your good decisions. Be empowered by the Lord as you do the right thing. So he specifically says, I don't give peace to you as the world gives, which means that our peace has to come from the peace of mind that we take control of. It comes from the fact that we have a solid hope that God never breaks his promises. What did Christ say in Matthew 10:28? Don't be afraid of people that can kill your body, and after that, there's nothing else they can do, because you're going to get up from the dead in a brand new body. So I'm giving you a different kind of peace, and you and I can grasp that kind of peace. Now, some of it, as we've prayed about and seen, can come from other people. Surrounding ourselves with Christians with whom we can be honest, and they're honest with us, and we feel a genuine connection. And then we can encourage them, they can encourage us, and that helps us to have a sense of peace. And also, making sure of our salvation. Do you speak in tongues? Do you know that the Holy Spirit is born and sealed inside you? And then beyond that, there are other things we can do just to make life a little more peaceful. But the true peace comes from the inside out. And then look at the command here that Christ follows with. He closes with, do not let your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. So basically, the mind controls the thoughts. The heart may, in a sense, generate thoughts. Your visceral, your enteric nervous system may generate emotions, but your mind can control your thoughts. And so he says, don't let your heart be troubled. And that's our responsibility. We're the ones that are not supposed to let our heart be troubled in these difficult situations. So with that, let's go to 2 Timothy chapter 3. And I want to start right in verse 1, because what Christ is going to do here, or God authoring Christ through Paul to Timothy. Timothy's in Ephesus. That's important. Ephesus is the capital of the Roman province of Asia. Asia was Western Turkey. Ephesus was one of the major trading emporiums in the Roman world. There was Corinth, there was Ephesus, Antioch of Syria, and Rome. Really, those were the four major trading emporiums in the Roman. So Ephesus was a huge city with a lot of traffic and a lot of different ideas floating around. And so in 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul writes by revelation, verse 1, but know this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. And we've been in the last days ever since, really, ever since the day of Pentecost. But as we get closer and closer to what I believe is, the rapture and the great tribulation, I believe we're getting closer and closer. Things will increase in difficulty. And indeed, Christ said that in his Olivet discourse, that things would get worse and worse. And so he says difficult times will come. Then verse 2. And what's intriguing about verses 2 to 5 is the verses themselves, or the content of the verses themselves. Because if you think about it, what God could have inspired Paul to do is write a little short summary verse, like, in the last days, difficult times will come. People will be selfish and evil, period. I mean, would that have covered it? Well, yeah, it would have. People are going to be selfish and evil, and it would have covered it. So why in the world is God spending 4 verses, 2, 3, 4, 5? Why is God spending 4 verses to specifically tell us how people are going to be? And the answer is he wants us to be mentally prepared. He wants us to understand what we're going to be up against if we're going to live a peaceable life. Because when things catch you off guard, when things don't go right that you were positive were going to go right, then that catches you off guard. It can throw you into to a tailspin. You lose your peace. And so the Lord here, God, is going to tell us what's going to go on with people. So I'm not going to dwell much on the list, but I do want to read it because I think it's important. It is God forewarning us about what we're going to see in the world around us. He says people will be lovers of themselves. I wonder if he had the selfie in mind when this came up. I just thought about that. But anyway, lovers of themselves, which means that they love you less and love themselves more. They're willing to treat you with disrespect or dishonesty because they love themselves. Lovers of money, boastful, arrogant. Arrogant is interesting. It's an interesting word. It actually comes from, well, I won't get into all of the background of the word arrogant, but what it means is not to ask. Arrogeo means it doesn't ask. An arrogant person isn't really interested in the truth. They aren't really interested in what's going on. They're not really going to ask you. They're going to cop an opinion and move forward with it, and they're done. And that's exactly what's happened in our culture. People are arrogant. Blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, no kidding. Unholy, no kidding. Without natural affection, I can't believe the abortion rates and stuff in our country. Unwilling to be reconciled to others, very powerful truth. We need to pay attention to that. That's a lot of times why you can't seem to make friends of people that become your enemies. Slanderers, without self-control, certainly. Brutal, not interested in doing what is good. No kidding, no interest in it at all. Treacherous, reckless in their behavior. By the way, and you can get caught up in that. You can be the collateral damage of someone's reckless behavior. Conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Yes, immediate satisfaction. Having a form of godliness. And what does that mean? Oh, we're spiritual. That one blows me away. The next generation, it's like, well, we're spiritual people, really? Based on what? Well, based on the fact that we say so. I just, there's a form of godliness, but denying its power. And what does the Bible say to do? Verse 5, if you're going to maintain your peace and avoid these people. In other words, don't get entangled with them. You're going to run into them. This is the way people are going to be, but recognize it. This is what's coming down the pipe. Find good, solid, conservative Christian friends who love the Lord and are willing to stand on the word, fellowship with them, support each other, buoy each other up, that kind of thing. And then verse 6, among these people that are all this horrible stuff, among them are those with false pretenses. That's important. Remember, they're going to be liars and that kind of stuff. They have false pretenses. They slip into homes. Now, it doesn't mean they sneak into the home, they're hiding in your closet and you don't know that they're there. What it means is they come into your home. I mean, they walk in, they're arrogant, they're bold, they're proud. They walk into your home, but what they don't tell you is what they're really thinking and what they really want. because in this case, it's talking about leaders and teachers who want to gather disciples, they want to gather followers, but they don't come in, I'm going to say what I need to say to make you a follower. Politicians, I'm sorry, but politicians do all the time. They lie and say what they know the people want to hear, and they think, well, when I'm in office, they'll see how wonderful I am, and I'll just do what I want to do. And that happens constantly. Um, Shame on them. But these guys with false pretenses, they slip into the home, they get in by their false pretense, and they capture the attention of weak-willed women. And weak-willed women in this culture, we'll take a look at the weak-willed women. The Greek word is actually, I'll give you the exact Greek word, gunakarion. Gunakarion. And the Greek word gune is woman. That's the Greek word for woman is gune, G-U-N, long E, or Ada. Um, and we get our word gynecology, the study of women, from gune. This is the diminutive. So it's literally like little women, but then little in what sense? And this is where the versions then take a stab at it. You have, of course, the King James Version, silly women, Complete Jewish Bible, weak-willed women, Christian Standard Bible, idle women, ESV, weak women, New King James, gullible women, the New Living Testament, vulnerable women. But I think weak-willed women really captures it because of the context. By the way, in the Roman world, the reason we talk about weak-willed women, and particularly weak-willed women of the upper class, would be that it was considered disgraceful in the Roman culture for a woman to get out in the world and do what you and I would know as be productive. Especially the wealthy women were just basically supposed to sit around and be served by all their slaves. And horribly boring life. I mean, just an amazingly boring life where you didn't really have a purpose in life other than direct your slaves and get fed by them, get dressed by them, get your hair done by them. And that was your whole life. And as a result, and I understand why, these women wanted to find something in life that was meaningful. And so what happened is they became prey to every kind of teacher and teaching and idea that came through. And of course, in Ephesus, that would be all kinds of things because you'd have traffic from all over the Greco-Roman world. You'd have traffic from Egypt. You'd have traffic from the East. You'd have traffic from the Greek islands. I mean, just, there'd be all kinds of teachers and stuff coming through, and they would all have suggestions. And plus, there'd be temptation, particularly in the upper crust of the Roman world. And this is something that you learn as you study Roman culture, that the men and women slept in separate bedrooms. And of course, any slave was the sexual property of the man of the house. So the husband was having sex with all the slaves and ignoring his wife. So not only did she have nothing to do, she was generally ignored by her husband. And so she really became prey to just finding something that was meaningful in life. And because of that, then they became weak-willed in the sense of making a decision and holding on to it. And they were weighed down with sins because there were so many different things that they weren't allowed to do, and the things they were allowed to do were not particularly productive. And then led along by various passions that would come up in their minds. In verse 7, who were always learning but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. And why is that? It's not because they hadn't heard the truth. They had heard the truth. And this is something that we see in the world around us. There's loads of people that hear the truth, but they don't grab onto it. They don't take hold of it. And oftentimes that's just because once you hear the truth and it's like, yeah, it demands something of you. Truth demands that you take time to pray. Truth demands that you be loving. Truth demands that you be sacrificial, that we live like Christ. So it's just exactly what happened in John chapter 6, when Jesus Christ had been teaching, he'd been traveling, he'd been doing miracles, he had large crowds. And then in John chapter 6, he puts a full stop on that, and he looks at the people and the leaders, and he says, you know, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, in other words, if you're not willing to live like me, you're not worthy of me. And the people, this is a hard saying. Who, you mean you're actually going to ask us to do something? Gosh, we were having a great time seeing the show, the miracles and all the stuff. That was really cool. But you're going to ask us to be like you and be sacrificial? That's a hard saying. Who can listen to that? And that happens in these situations. And you and I, we make up our mind to do the hard thing. We make up our mind to read the Bible. We make up our mind to pray. We make up our mind to evangelize. We make up our mind to live a Christian life and deny ourselves some pleasures. You know, that kind of thing. And here, that's what's going on. The truth, people would hear it, but because it demanded something of them, they would move on. So we don't want to be in a position where we're weak-willed. We want to be able to make decisions, make good decisions, and hang on to those decisions. And you know, if we look through history, powerful men and women were able to make decisions. I have two examples from the word that I think are just really that I love. One good, one bad, if you will. Let's go to Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5 is Moses and Aaron going in front of Pharaoh. A bold thing to do, risk making Pharaoh angry. But Pharaoh, for all of his faults, was a good leader in the sense that he could make a decision. And in Exodus chapter 5, verse 1, Moses and Aaron come to Pharaoh and say, you know, the God of Israel says, let my people go. Verse 2, Pharaoh says, who is Yahweh? I don't know Yahweh. And then verse 3, Moses and Aaron, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. We need to go into the wilderness. Verse 4, but the king of Egypt said to them, why do you, Moses and Aaron, draw the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. Verse 5, and Pharaoh said, behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them cease from their burdens. Verse 6, and the same day, watch this, the same day, Pharaoh was not going to let this evil spread, evil in his mind. The same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, you are to no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the number of bricks that they made before, you are to require from them. You are not to diminish any of it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, let us go and sacrifice to our God. And I love in verse 6 how it says the same day. Pharaoh was a decisive leader. He wasn't weak-willed going, oh my, the Israelites are unhappy. What am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, he was a powerful leader. He was a decisive leader. He made a decision and he went with it. And that's one of the things that we as Christians need to be aware of. We need to be forewarned, and Timothy does. It tells us the kind of people that we're going to run into. It tells us the kind of situations we're going to run into. And then we don't want to be weak-willed about it. We want to be able to make our decisions and move forward. On the positive side, I love what Ruth does in the book of Ruth. You know, the story of the book of Ruth is Naomi and her husband and her two sons moved from Israel to Moab to escape a famine. Naomi's husband and her two sons both died, and Naomi wants to go back to Israel. And in verse 11, Naomi says, go back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Verse 12, go back, my daughters, go your way. And Naomi's basically crying in her beer, and she's like, go back. No, Naomi needs the support, but she's just at this point, she's kind of emotionally crushed. She's unstable, and she's telling the girls, Orpah and Ruth, to go back to Moab and find husbands and that kind of thing. In verse 14, they lift up their voices, and Orpah left. And then in verse 15, Naomi encourages Ruth again. Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people. Go back to your sister-in-law. And then verse 16, and you can just see this. I would love to have been there in real life to see how this exactly happened, but you could make a movie about this because, Ruth here just has made a decision, and she stands up and she confronts her mother-in-law in verse 16, and she says, "Do not press me to abandon you or to return from following after you." The verbs are imperative. She is right in Naomi's face. Quit telling me to go home. I love that. Just make a decision, make it right. And she says, "For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Yahweh do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." And Ruth she made that decision. She wasn't weak-willed. She didn't waffle. Maybe it's a good idea that I go home. You're right. I'd be with my family. We don't know what's coming. And she didn't. Neither Ruth nor Naomi knew exactly what was going to happen, but Ruth knew that Moabites were not particularly in favor with the Israelite people. So what we see is we see when we study the word, we see people that are willing to make a good decision and stand on it. And that certainly happened. And that's something that you and I need to do in life, is to make a powerful decision. So let's go back to Second Timothy, because it talks about, okay, verse 6 again, "For among them are those with false pretenses who slip into homes and capture the attention of weak-willed women who are weighed down with sins." And that's one thing that happens to people who are weak-willed. If we're weak-willed, then a lot of times we get talked into sin, or we drift into sin, or we somehow or other end up in sins that we shouldn't end up in. Where if we were strong-willed, make good decisions, and then move forward in the Lord. But these women are weighed down with sins, and that also points to the value of having a clear conscience. When you and I have a clear conscience, it's a lot easier to move forward. And the one of the prophecies today, Mina's prophecy or interpretation, that God has cleansed us. That you and I are cleansed from sin. We don't have to be weighed down with the things that are in our lives that are broken. Yeah, the song said, we're broken and we are. Romans 7 says we're broken and we are. But God makes up that difference. God calls us. God's the one who made us holy. God is the one who empowers us, and we can stand in that. And so we don't need to be weighed down with sins, even if we sometimes sin. We don't have to be weighed down with it. We can deal with it honestly, confess the sin, figure out a plan to not get sucked into it again, and then move forward. And then also, these women were weighed down with sins and led along by various passions. That's something that we need to pay attention to, because advertisers spend millions and probably billions of dollars trying to figure out, what do we say, what do we present to sway people. I was watching a little bit of TV yesterday, and there was a Ram. I forget which company makes Ram trucks, but there was a Ram truck on. But didn't tell you a thing about the Ram truck. There was a baseball game. And I thought to myself, the vast majority of the ad was about a baseball game. I was like, a baseball game? What about the truck? All he did was get the balls and the bat out of the truck. That was basically the whole truck, the whole ad. And the rest of it was a baseball game and a guy playing with youth, which then that's really heartwarming, and it pulls your heartstrings. It's like, oh wow, look at that nice guy playing with baseball with those kids, and tells you nothing about the truck. And the advertiser spent millions figuring out that people would feel good. They want that feeling, and so we're going to associate it with this truck. And advertisers do that. And what happens then is, I need a new truck, or I need a new phone, or I need a whatever in the heck it happens to be. And we get pulled into things because people have done a lot of research on what motivates us. So what do? We got to be forearmed. in our minds, where things like, and having um, food and clothing and shelter, let us be content, that kind of thing. These people they're led along by various passions. It's nice to be passionate about things. It's nice to have the means. If you need something, it's nice to have the means to get the thing that you need. But it's it's mentally draining to be led along by a different passion day after day after day after day. And then uh, verse 7, who are always learning but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Why are they always learning? Because there's always some new guy with some new idea. Today it might be the internet, and some new presentation on YouTube every day or something like that. But then the truth is simple, it's there, and we need to have it, and we need to grab onto it. And some of the decisions we make aren't going to be easy. They're going to be difficult to make. That's a kind of a tough one. This would be a lot easier, to not be weak-willed if the decisions we had to make were easy. But sometimes the decisions we have to make are difficult, and they lead us sometimes into trouble with our families. They can lead us into persecution, being persecuted. Doesn't mean it's not the right decision to make, but those decisions can be difficult, and we need to be prepared for that. Let's go to the Gospel of Luke. In Luke chapter 9, Christ is talking about following him. And in Luke chapter 9, in verse 23, Christ says, and he said to them all, he pulls his apostles and disciples around him, and he says to them all, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. And one of the things we noticed about this record and the difference between this record in Matthew and in Mark and in Luke, as is in Luke, it adds the word daily, which I'm sure Christ put in there because it's a daily battle. Life has daily difficult decisions. And so he said, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. And we have to be prepared so that we're not worn down. Sometimes things drag on. My wife and I are having some things in our house remodeled, and some of them just seem to drag on. Here in Florida, if you remodel a window in the outside of your house, the new window you put in according to code has to be hurricane proof, glass. Well, there's been a lot of remodeling going on down here in South Florida. Windows are not necessarily easy to get. So we ordered a window in January that came in May. And so we had waited and waited and waited for this window. And then when it came, both the upper and the lower panes were broken. So now we're waiting again, and that kind of drawn out stuff can just weigh on you, and you have to mentally understand it, mentally apprise it, and then take charge of it. And here's what Christ said: you take up your cross daily. And my wife and I have had to do that, and we've had numerous conversations about, oh, this is wearing. Yes, it is. And we take up our cross daily and enter into the fight. And he goes on after saying, take up his cross daily and follow me, verse 24, for whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Now, back in the Old Testament, before the day of Pentecost, they were talking about salvation. You and I know, we're going to save our life by confessing Christ as Lord. But the other side of the coin is we want rewards. We want rewards in the kingdom. We want what Peter had called a rich welcome into the kingdom. And so Christ is very honest here. If you want to save your life, you lose it. What does that mean? You make God your priority instead of you. Doesn't mean you die, but whoever loses his life, now, in this case, it can include dying, but that's not the only meaning. But whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. Verse 25, for what does it profit a person if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? And that's precisely correct. We want to make sure that God is our priority, that we're seeking first the kingdom of God. So kind of pulling this together and summarizing it, life is difficult. There are people in situations that are difficult. We're going to run into that. We don't want to be weak-willed. We want to be able to be decisive, like Pharaoh or like Ruth, make a decision. If it's not right, we can change it. But some of those decisions we're going to be persecuted for. The decision to be godly, the decision to do what is right is not appreciated by the world. They can think you're hard-hearted. They can think you're cruel. They can think you're closed-minded. They can think you're prejudiced. They can think all kinds of things. That doesn't matter. What matters is what Christ thinks of you. We can't change what the world thinks about God, but we can change how we act and how we think about God. And then, like I say, we take measures to have that peace that Christ talked about. One of those, as I mentioned earlier, make sure you have good Christian friends. They're going to stand with you. You can share with them. They will support you, and you can support them. But that's one thing that we can do. But we have entered, I mean, since the last days when Paul wrote Timothy, there was a big persecution going on in the Roman world. There's still a huge persecution 2,000 years later. There's a huge persecution against Christians. And we need to do what it takes to stand up for Christ, make the difficult decisions in life that need to be made, and just press forward in the Lord. And so that's what I wanted to share this morning. And God bless you guys, and thank you for being here. We can open the floor for discussion and wherever y'all want to go.